This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek and Pacifica, and we've been covering the struggle against racism in the labor movement and also the recent developments in the Teamsters Union and the invite to Trump to go to the Teamster headquarters, and also the danger of the rise of fascism in the labor movement and increasing racism. And joining us is Howard Williamson. He's a member of Teamsters Local 162, retired, and has a long history of struggle in that union and in the Teamsters and labor movement. Welcome to our show, Howard.
Glad to be on, Steve.
So, Howard, why don't you talk about how you got involved and became a Teamster in the union?
Well, first of all, I'm a second-generation Teamster out of Oakland, California. My dad was a 29-year warehouseman who unfortunately passed away at the age 49. And as a kid growing up in Oakland, my dad and his co-workers, they would get in the kitchen and every Friday, and before they started playing cards and drinking their beers, they would always talk about what was happening in their local union. And I used to listen to that stuff, and I grew up wanting to be a Teamster. But the other piece was, as a young kid growing in Oakland, UPS then was starting off, and they were furniture movers for a department store called Capwell's. And every morning I lived in a blue collar neighborhood. I'd walk by Coca-Cola and Kraft Foods and Nabisco, and I would always end up my walk at the parking lot at Capwell's, and I would see these beautiful brown trucks, and I would see these gentlemen standing at Parade West with their uniforms on and their polished shoes. And I said, God, that would be great to drive one of those trucks. But the downside of that for me was, when I was looking at that, I didn't see any individuals out there that looked like me or workers of colors. And that being said, as a young kid, I started throwing rocks at UPS trucks. And the creator doesn't like ugly. So that being said, 1979, I actually went to work for UPS and had a long 36-year career there. And the creator doesn't like ugly. So that was the payback for me throwing rocks at the trucks, needless to say.
So you began to work there, and as you say, there was a struggle from the get-go on the issue of race, hiring of blacks, integration. What was involved in that fight inside the Teamsters Union?
Well, basically, for me being a UPSer, the struggle was twofold, i.e., having to deal with UPS management, over supervision, harassment. That was actually my wonderful career. I was actually terminated 5 times and reinstated 5 times. The bigger piece for me, 1979, going into, dealing with those struggles, being involved with the union. In I would say, was it 1990? Let's see. Yeah. Anyway, 1990, me and some of my fellow co-workers decided that enough was enough. And we decided that we needed to organize, not only within our local union, Local 162, but as African Americans in color, Swan Island. We actually formed a group called BUMP, Blacks United to Motivate Progress. And the reason we formed that group, going to union meetings, talking to our leadership, nobody knew anything about any Black caucuses or anything on the international level that addressed the concerns of African American workers. During my years at UPS, several things took place. When I first got hired, I was told that if I couldn't shave, then I would not be able to work at UPS. And I had, and actually, there was actually a discrimination group, Black Teamsters and Teamsters, in Denver, Colorado, involving this whole thing about the beards and stuff. And Black UPSers took it on in conjunction with the Denver NAACP, and they fought that. And the sad part was that UPS and the Teamsters did not side with the drivers. And so that opened up this whole situation for me of inclusion versus exclusion. And that's been the struggle of African American workers, since 1619. The question has always been inclusion versus exclusion. It is more true today than it was then, 1619. It is more true today than it was for me in my struggles with Local 162 and the IBT in my 36-year career. So we had formed a couple of things happened. 1989, 1990, we put a slate together that changed the leadership of 162. And that leadership involved myself and three fellow UPSers, Roger Niedermeyer, Jack Selby, Denny Whitcop, and we were part of a slate. I was not on that slate, but it was a slate primarily of UPSers that took over that local, and it was headed by a gentleman by the name of Al Panic. And the key to that, us UPSers, us four UPSers, Selby, Whitcop, and Niedermeyer, what we all had in common, as not only were we drivers at UPS, but we were also active in Teamsters for a Democratic Union, TDU, and we ran on that slate. I didn't run, and the reason I did not end up going with the slate, there was a business agent that Secretary Treasurer Al Panic saw as a political threat, and this business agent actually saved my job. So when that whole question came up about the slate, I decided it would be best for me not to be part of the slate, but be part of the change that took place in Local 162. So going forward in 1990, that motivated me to organize Teamsters of color in the workplace. And that's when we formed Blacks United to Motivate Progress. And it wasn't limited to Blacks. It was open to all individuals who believed in Teamsterism, trade unionism, and all that goes with that. BUMP was a great organization. In 1992, we had a meeting with UPS management. And the result of that meeting was all jobs in Swan Island at UPS, from part-timers at UPS to drivers to those individuals who wanted to go into management. That was all part of the involvement of Blacks United to Motivate Progress. But the other piece and the bigger piece was that getting involved with Local 162. And I can remember, this might have been in 1994, maybe. 19 of us showed up at a UPS, not a UPS, but a Local 162 meeting. And it was pretty interesting because I was always going to every meeting. I made sure from day one as a Teamster, I was going to be involved. Swan Island, I was passing out convoy dispatches, was vilified for that and ridiculed for doing that. But that being said, we were always going to union meetings. And I would tell my fellow coworkers, all my drivers, both, white, non-white, I said, got to show up. I said, if we don't show up, we'll never be heard. We'll never have our issues addressed. And you got to remember that our business agents, our leadership, they work for us. We don't work for them. And if we don't stand tall and be part of that process, we're going to get eaten up by that process. But that being said, there was an occasion when there were 19 African Americans shows up at a Local 162 meeting, and you have a sergeant at arms there. Normally you show up, he was a nice guy. He was a UPSer on the Southwest side. And if you showed up, he would always say, welcome, brother, welcome, sister. And you had to show your little dues receipt. And it was a beautiful thing. But on that particular day, we show up en masse, and the response was, what are all you people doing here? and the president of the local fired this person on the spot from his union duties. And I said, no, don't do that. Because if you do that, going forward, every African American he sees, he's going to blame them for his stupidity, his ignorance, and his lack of Teamsterism. So, that was part of the process of dealing, with my local. But as I said earlier, I became a strong, devoted member of TDU, off on membership, passing out convoy dispatches. And as a result of my activism within my union, Uh, Leading up to the 1997 UPS strike, I was a strike captain on Swan Island. That was probably one of the best times of my life being a Teamster. And sad to say that the issues that we were addressing then are still in play now. It was that 1997 strike was about part-timers. And the slogan was part-time America won't work. And us drivers, we were doing well. The package car drivers, the feeder drivers, we were comfortable. But those part-timers who loaded our trucks, who did all the real work, and without a good, preloader, your job was, crap. And that's what that strike was about. We won that strike. And if I can share a little bit of history with you on that, if I may, the reason we won that strike, and I'll tell you why we won it. There was a show called The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and the strike lasted 19, maybe 21 days. And in the small towns, people were crossing the picket lines. We were getting our butts kicked, if that's the truth. But in the big cities, in the Seattles, the Portlands, the San Franciscos, the New Yorks, we were still holding, but we were breaking. And so I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with The Tonight Show, or Jay Leno got on there and did his monologue. And what he did was he gave UPS corporate America hell over the treatment of his UPS drivers and of all UPS drivers. And what was happening on Swan Island, it was like a party. We had a community that came out en masse. They supported the strike. And Jay Leno went on there. And when he did that, I called my secretary treasurer up, Roger Niedermeyer. I think it was out. It was one of them. I called him up and I said, "Did you see the Tonight Show?" And they said, "No." Why? I said, "The strike's over." He says, "What do you mean?" I said, "If you watch that monologue, you watch." The next day, UPS ended the strike. But another big piece to that I got to share with you, and tell me if I'm talking too much. My mother-in-law at that time was the first African-American judge in the state of Oregon, second attorney. So while we were on strike, I'm at my mother-in-law's house, and there's a knock at the door, UPS delivery, and my mother-in-law opens the door, and it's one of my managers, gentleman by the name of Vince Blood. And my mother-in-law says, "Howard, we've got a scab, a strike breaker out here." My mother-in-law grew up in New York City, and she worked in WPA, and she worked with folks like Orson Welles and Ralph Ellison. And she met Eleanor Roosevelt, who told her, "Young lady, you can be whatever you want to be. You dream it, you can be it." But that being said, my mother-in-law was just furious. And it was probably, it was 3-digit temperatures out there. It was hot. It was hot in August. And my mother-in-law's reading Vince the Riot Act. I go to the door and I look at this poor guy. He's got sweat going down his face. And so I go get some bottled water for him. And Mom says, "You're going to give that scab, a strike breaker, some of my water?" And I said, "Mom, he's just doing his job." And she says, "Okay, you give him the water." And then she comes to the front door and she says, "Young man, that package that you have in your hand, take it back. I don't want it. You're taking work away from my son. And don't you come back on my steps again until you get, until you make my son whole." So I got to share that story with you. But
TDU was a national organization which was formed to reform the Teamsters, to make it a democratically run organization. It did have a black section of TDU which said they wanted to fight racism in the union. What happened?
Well, in 2008, I don't know if you look at the Convoy Dispatch, 2008, they talked about the composition of a union. And they said then, and I'm still doubling down on this, that a union should be a reflection of its membership. And that dream is still in play. Dr. Martin Luther King, who had a long relationship with the Teamsters, was not fooled by the inclusion, exclusion, and the lack of representation within the Teamsters. Dr. King said, "Being a member and not having a seat at the decision-making table was second-class citizenship. And quit.
Continue. You can continue. It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, that, I don't know why this thing keeps moving. Sorry here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's no
Okay.
problem. Okay, good.
Okay. That's still in play now. The struggle we have a Teamster Black Caucus, and of course there's a TNBC Teamster National Black Caucus that was started by a gentleman by the name of James Cleveland. But the bottom line is simply this: we still have this issue of inclusion versus exclusion. If you look at the General Executive Board of the IBT, it's obviously not a reflection of its membership. You have 2 African Americans VPs, you have 1 Hispanic VP, and then you have an African American trustee. And those numbers aren't a reflection of the union. And I think we're at 1.3, maybe 1.4 million Teamsters. So there should be at least 6 folks of color at that table, if not more. And it's still a work in progress. I think this marriage that TDU has had with Sean O'Brien, I supported that ticket. I campaigned for that ticket. I was concerned about that marriage. They, i.e., O'Brien, ran on a message of transparency and openness, and it's been nothing at all transparent. It has not been nothing at all about openness. And the biggest, as far as an African American Teamster, the biggest insult was bringing, Donald Trump into the House of Labor. Being a candidate, for public office doesn't give you the right to come into the House of Labor. That right has to be earned and it has to be deserved. And you don't get it because you're a Republican or a Democrat. You get it if you have a proven track record of trade unionism and supporting legislation that supports work and workers. A better way of doing, instead of having, I call what's happening right now a dog and pony show. There's a better way of doing this. And the better way would be, we have a Teamster Voice. We have a Teamster magazine, I think, that comes out 3, maybe 4 times a year. A better way would be, in those 2 publications, we have 400 and what do you have? 535 members of the House and Senate, 435 in the House, and 100 senators. A better way would be to give a report card 3 times a year, 4 times a year of each of those representatives. Have it in black and white, so you have a track record. So 4 years later, when you have individuals who want to come to the House of Labor and ask for our support, ask for our vote, we have in black and white a report card. If you look at this latest guy, Josh Hawley, that O'Brien has met with, the AFL-CIO, the machinists, everybody, on this report card, 0 in terms of supporting work and workers' issues. And then Donald Trump, that's the ultimate insult, a history of anti-worker, anti-unions politics. We won't even talk about, a racist, everything, all the garbage that he brings in. And why, for me, that was and that is the ultimate insult, having this man in the House of Labor, or anybody like that in the House of Labor. It's a total insult to its members. And the sad piece is those individuals who were spoken out and voiced their outrage are now having to deal with the politics of Teamster retaliation and retribution. You got a brother in 162, Tony Cochran, who filed a grievance against O'Brien and Zuckerman regarding the Mar-a-Lago incident. And he has been vilified and talked about. You got Edgar Escovez, I think that's, I hope got his last name, 952, out of Orange, California. The same situation. And God bless John Palmer, because of all the members of the General Executive Board, he voiced his outrage. And I don't, to the life of me, I don't know why the other members of the General Executive Board just remain silent. And the response that you get is, well, we have members who are Republicans, or they call themselves Republicans, or we have members that support Donald Trump, MAGA, or as my friend Chris Vera calls, the party of the Confederacy. I call it the party of white supremacy, because that's who they are. And they show you every day who they are. And they don't have a right to be in our house. And the job of a leader, real leaders, you have to educate the uneducated. And if you are a supporter of the MAGA movement, if you're a supporter of Donald Trump, two things. Either you're a white supremacist, a sexist, anti-union, anti-trade unionist person at best, or at worst, you are an individual that can't pass 8th grade American history with your ignorance and your stupidity. And what a leader is supposed to do, supposed to educate his members as to those individuals that support the issues of trade unionism, those individuals that support work and workers. This is not happening. This is not happening.
And the working people in this country are facing great dangers.
Yes.
A rise of fascism, the danger of there was an attempted coup and insurrection, although they deny that. But I mean, anybody who looks at history, they can see that that's never happened before, that a group has tried to prevent the certification of election by breaking into Congress and trying to prevent that. And probably if they were black or brown, they would have been shot down, machine gunned, if blacks had done that.
And it's so obvious, even Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles could see that it was an insurrection. That's how obvious that it is. And they're making no secret about it. I'm of the school of thought we have had an ongoing coup in this country since January 6th. In America, if we don't wake up, we're going to lose this experiment that's been in play for 241 plus years. We're about to lose it. And it's acceptable, the behavior of the MAGA movement and all that associated with it has become acceptable. It's become the norm. And it saddens me when I look on Facebook, I see some of my retired brothers from UPS and some of the posts on Joe Biden, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. And I've called some of them up. I don't do the Facebook thing because if it's negativity, I don't deal with negativity. But I've called some of my brothers and sisters up, and I said, okay, if you don't like Joe Biden, then guess what? Don't take your pension check every month. Don't take your Social Security. Don't take your Medicare. Throw all that away, because that's what you're about to lose. And that's what's in play. And these guys people don't remember how we lost Central States because of a bad decision-making policies on the part of our leadership at the IBT. And it was Joe Biden that saved Central States. That was the hallmark of why you're a trade unionist, why you're a Teamster. And how shall I say, it's not a good time right now in this country.
Now, there is the issue of working class having its own political party, because there are a lot of workers pissed off at both the Democrats and Republicans.
Yes.
Look at what's happening in Palestine, where U.S. is supporting military armaments. We don't have money to have health care for all the people in this country, to have free education, but we've got unlimited money for trillions of dollars for wars abroad. And yet the unions are acquiescent to that. They go along with that policy.
Well, the sad state of the union is simply this. when it comes to the two-party systems, pardon my sarcasm, there's not much difference between a Democrat and a Republican. The only difference is one's a fox, the other one's a wolf, and both are canine and members of the dog family. And one's a little more compassionate than the other, but they're all beholding to the corporate bosses. I remember, maybe 20, 25 years ago, Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, who started as a congressman. And I knew him when he was working as a legal aid kid on 7th and Alberta before some beautiful women called the Grey Panthers Party brought him into play. And I remember him telling me at a Labor Day picnic, he says, Howard, organized labor cannot give me the money that I'm getting from corporate America. So I said, so Senator, you're telling me that you're bought and paid for? He says, no, I'm not. I said, you just did. And that's the reality. We got two sides of the house and they're all bought and paid for. You know, it's really funny. Up until Harry Truman, maybe Dwight Eisenhower, do you know there was no Secret Service guarding the president? Do you know Truman rode around in his own car with his wife and there was no Secret Service and you didn't have this big benefit package when you left the White House? And all of a sudden, with Eisenhower and after Eisenhower, what we have today, we have folks that come into the House and the Senate broker than the 10 Commandments. And then when they come out, they're millionaires. And it's shameful because work and workers and their families, we have to take a back seat to all of this. And what we get from our elected officials are crumbs off the table. And that's the reality of an American worker.
And one of the issues facing Teamsters, you've had layoffs at UPS. There is apparently no protection from AI, although Sean O'Brien, SOB, said that there would be protection in the UPS contract. AI, Goldman Sachs did a study, said 350 million workers would lose their jobs.
Yes.
And there's a real life and death question for future of Teamsters and other workers. If they bring in AI and there's no control, it's really benefiting the companies in getting rid of labor. And what should working people do about AI? What is the solution to this technology, which is being built in by the companies to make more money by getting rid of workers?
Well, first of all, I find it hard to believe when they had this was supposed to be this great, wonderful contract. I find it hard to believe they didn't see this coming. I find it hard to believe they didn't see this elimination of day sorts. And I have some friends who are high on the food chain at UPS and retired, and they, I still talk to them, and they're telling me that the goal of UPS is 80% elimination of its part-time workforce, and in the next 5 years. And the fact that you can't talk about this, the fact that our leadership vilifies and ridicules those individuals who want to bring it up, to me, that spells complicity. They're either going to be part of the problem or part of the solution. But I feel that one thing that workers need to do, this whole thing of AI, it's not like it just happened overnight. I mean, you think about it, when you started going to the grocery store and you saw checkout, I should say, you saw self-checkout, you should have seen this coming. And probably in terms of robotics, there's no doubt in my mind that Amazon is probably doing everything with robotics. There's rumors flying around that UPS is already doing some form of it. And I find it hard and unbelievable that Teamster leadership is not talking about this openly and honestly, and not building an army to take this on through either ballot initiatives, third party, or whatever. But that's what needs to be done. But to sit back and fight each other and have a leadership that vilifies its members for speaking out and addressing these issues, it's criminal. And it's sad. It's really sad to see this.
And the issue of technology is not a bad thing, but
No.
I know when computers were being popularized, they argued that it's going to free people from manual jobs. It's going to make life better. You'd have more leisure time. the reality is now people working for Uber, Lyft, and these car companies are working 2, 3 jobs. They're tethered to their cell phone. People are working 24 hours a day trying to survive. I mean, it seems like the working class is becoming more exploited and more pushed in a desperate situation to survive. And yet there is no real solution within the present framework. It seems like in California, where I'm from, they're allowing these robo-taxis to come in
Yes.
that put out all the drivers. Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat, vetoed a bill pushed by the Teamsters to have a driver on trucks over 10,000 pounds. And this is a existential crisis for truck drivers, for Teamsters, as it was for the Writers and Screen Actors Guild. Yet the rest of the labor movement, unions are not discussing and debating it. There is no education campaign, national education campaign, to confront this and say, let's have technology, but let it benefit working people instead of the billionaires.
No, I totally agree with you. The behavior of union leadership, instead of being part of the solution, it seems like by their behavior, they become part of the problem. Another example of being part of the problem, I mean, you look at some of my brothers on Teamster Link, which was started by Tom Leadham and Bill Zimmerman and Tim Sylvester. And Teamster Link has been a vehicle for workers to express their discontent, outrage, to give information from locations as to what's going on. And instead of the International Union applauding that, what do they go out and do? They go out and hire the biggest union busting law firm in the world, Nixon Peabody, to shut it down. I mean, how you can't be any more disgusting with that than that. And it's sad, and it's sad for me as a longtime TDU member to see TDU leadership just, I just got my TDU magazine, the just whatever they changed the name to, The Voice, and there's nothing in there talking about this stuff. And TDU was all about bottom up leadership, bottom up organizing, and not top down dictatorship and retaliation and retribution. And that's the reality now. And hopefully some of my brothers and sisters who are still trade unionists, this is the time for you to stand up and holler and scream, show up at your union meetings. And when you have a secretary treasurer or a president or a business agent try to tell you shut up and sit you down, you look them in the face and say, bro, you work for me. I don't work for you. And the bottom line is, we voted you in. We will vote you out. And that's it, and you got to do that with your politicians. You got to do that with your leaderships. I would encourage any and everybody, a vehicle to look at. You talk about third parties. You got the working families parties out here. But another piece that I would suggest to you, if any of you have heard of the NAACP, the National Association of Colored People, the oldest civil rights organization in this country, and it's open to any and all. They have 22 standing committees, and the one that I would tell you to get involved in and become a part of is the Labor and Industries Committee, the Political Action Committee. Get involved in those committees. There are chapters of the NAACP all over the country. And if trade unionists can man up that organization, we can take this fight nationally. And that needs to happen, because as long as you have politicians who feel comfortable, as long as you have union bosses, if that's what you want to call them, or union leadership that feels comfortable, then we're all in trouble. Because the job of a union leader, the job of any leader, is not to feel comfortable, to always look behind and be worried, if you're not representing your constituents, if you're not representing your members. And this has to happen. Now is the time for this to happen. And the other piece is, I would say this to my brothers and my sisters who have leadership positions within the Teamsters, whether it's on a local level, joint councils. It's time to man up. It's time to question authority. It's time when you see the Josh Hawleys or the Donald Trumps coming into our house, we got to voice our outrage. Now, right now, I don't understand why the Teamsters are dragging their feet on an endorsement. And I got to tell you this, when O'Brien took that photo op, not only with Donald Trump, but with Josh Hawley, those are endorsements, folks. When you do a photo op, that's an endorsement. And they're caving into the dark side, and it's a direct slap in the face to trade unionists. It's a direct slap in the face to workers and workers' families. We can't stand for this. We can't, and don't be afraid to address power. That's what you got to do. That's what has made America great. You want to make America great, then stand up and fight the fight. And the biggest fight right now, we've got to get people to register to vote, and we got to get the vote out. If we don't do this, we are committing suicide. I talked to some folks in Teamster Mobilize. I talked to some of my young folks who are very passionate about peace in Gaza and Palestinian self-determination. And I get it, and I understand it. But you got to remember, folks, you got to fight not just on one front. You got to fight on all fronts. I had a conversation with a young lady that told me, she says, well, Howard, we're going to have to go through some short-term suffering for some long-term livability. And I said, young lady, if Donald Trump goes back into the White House, there is not going to be any short-term suffering. It's going to be long-term. It's going to be severe. It's going to be you. It's going to be me. And take a good look at a history book and look at America, because it will be coming to an end. And this is the struggle that must be out. Don't be afraid to speak out.
And unions have the power. There could be general strikes, but if people aren't educated and aren't aware of what's coming down the road, working people are in trouble. And I think that's the issue. There has to be education about the danger of fascism and what workers have to be doing to get organized to prepare, whether Trump wins or doesn't win. Even if Biden wins, we still have a growth of fascism in this country. It's not going to end with an election.
Do you remember a period in this country when we had Harry Bridges, leaders of the longshoremen unions, and we had James R. Hoffa, who was in charge of the Teamsters? There was a period in this history in this country when nothing moved by boat or truck unless you had the endorsement and support of labor. And I would say the one and all, the Europeans seem to have this figured out. On May 1st, instead of going out and marching and celebrating, I would say every worker in this country, from the nannies that are taking care of babies, every worker, I don't care what you do. On May 1st, we need to have a day where everybody says, screw it, we ain't doing nothing. This whole country would come to a standstill. And, don't be afraid to do that. Wives, don't even cook for your husbands in the kitchen. Don't do anything on that. Have a strike on May 1st and say, we're mad as hell and we're not doing anything. And this has to change. And, that's the start. That is the start. And this is the struggle that must be. I mean, I'm 74 years old, and I'm in the fourth quarter of my life, hoping to plan for some overtime. But to my young kids out here and my grandkids, great grandkids, this struggle is for them. And we all have to be part of this struggle. We got to decide we're going to be part of the problem or part of the solution.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for joining us, and Howard, and I appreciate your contributions and your experience.